Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about, well, the thing lots of you have been asking about, which is the upcoming ban on handgun transfers in Canada. Now, what does it mean to transfer a handgun? Well, that would cover buying one from a store, buying one from a gun show, or buying one from somebody, as a private sale, whether online or in person. It would also cover getting one as a gift or as an inheritance. And this is a big deal because a lot of people are out there asking me, listen, I've got a World War II Luger that was a war capture. It's a family heirloom. Can I pass this on to my children and their children and so forth? Because this is, a family heirloom. It really connects us to, the achievements of our our past family members. Will I be able to maintain that bit of tradition and family history? And unfortunately, the answer is no. This will restrict all of those transfers. It'll prevent them from happening. So that is going to cause a lot of anguish for a lot of people out there. Now, this was being brought in on the notion that it's going to save lives, and it's not going to do that. When we look at handgun homicides in Canada, they're almost universally associated with organized crime, and they're typically conducted with firearms that are already prohibited in Canada. Where are these guns coming from? Well, they're being smuggled. And, this is not going to impact the smuggling market. They've said, oh, well, this will prevent people from engaging in straw purchases. Well, straw purchases are a negligible source of criminal use of handguns in Canada. And further, if you eliminate 100% all the straw purchases, and it's still not going to stop criminals from having handguns, because we're talking about people who are typically dealing drugs, which means that they are in the business of acquiring, importing, and selling contraband. So making handguns more contraband isn't going to slow them down. It's not like this is, any harder to move than a brick of heroin. So this isn't going to accomplish what it was set out for, and the timing of it is actually kind of ugly, because they've had this stuff ready to go. It's been drafted for a while. And we see this being introduced in the wake of an American tragedy to sort of solve an American problem. Well, we're not the US, and further, I really disagree with this idea of waiting for a tragedy in order to push forward your legislative agenda. If you're ever sitting around going, man, I hope there's a whole bunch of people who get killed, that's really not a good thing. You should really re-examine the choices about who you are that brought you to that moment. That's about as nicely as I can put it. And I could probably put it substantially less nicely, but YouTube might strike my channel if I expressed my full thoughts on that one. All right, so let's look at the actual regulation that's been put forward here, and then we'll talk about some of the details and some of the sort of implementation and other stuff around it. So this is regulations amending certain regulations made under the Firearms Act. And importantly, you see May 30th here. That's an important date because that tells us when that was introduced. Now you might be saying, I didn't see this online. Well, they introduced it in a kind of sneaky fashion. I'm not going to go into that too much here because the video would get to be too long. But conditions of transferring firearms and other weapons regulations. So they want to amend this by adding the following language. So handguns. The chief firearms officer may authorize the transfer of a handgun to an individual only if the individual needs the handgun A to protect his life, the life of that individual or of other individuals. Now, protection of life is a very narrow aspect. So that is not something that they grant sort of very commonly. Typically, there are like under 10 people in Canada who might have this. It's very difficult to get. I'm going to do a video at some point about what actually getting one looks like. The next one is for use in connection with his or her lawful profession or occupation. So that would probably cover like armored security and so forth, armored car drivers. Or C, to train, compete, or coach in a handgun shooting discipline that is on the program of the International Olympic Committee or the International Paralympic Committee, and the individual provides a letter to a chief firearms officer from a provincial or national sports shooting governing body indicating, 1, that the individual trains, competes, or coaches in such a discipline. Of course, how do you train, compete, or coach in such a discipline unless you've already got the gun, right? So 2, the specific discipline in which the individual trains, competes, or coaches. And 3, that the handgun that the individual seeks to acquire is necessary for training, competing, or coaching in that specific discipline. Now, they're only allowing, the Olympics here. They're not allowing 3-gun. They're not allowing IPSC. They're not allowing any of the other things, cowboy action shooting, IDPA, any of these things. They're really just trying to narrow it down to only the Olympics. Well, the Olympics aren't the only sport out there, and I don't currently do Olympic shooting. I can't say I wouldn't in future, but that's not what I enjoy most. So it's interesting that they're limiting that. They're also adding an aspect here of transporting from a port of entry. So this is with respect to import. And so the first thing is if you already held a registration certificate for that handgun. So it looks like they're going to allow you to re-import it if you take it elsewhere for a competition. Or 2, they possess an authorization to carry under Section 20. Most of us don't have an authorization to carry. 3, the same Olympic shooting discipline aspect. And 4, in the case of a non-resident individual, that they have the declaration and authorization of transport referred to in the particular section with respect to that handgun. So all of this is for... So that I didn't dig into that one or that section too much. I believe that that's for like people who are driving their guns from the U.S. to, for instance, Alaska, or back from Alaska to the mainland U.S. Now, in terms of how this regulation actually comes into force, there's some interesting aspects, because one thing people have asked me is, when does this kick in? Now, you remember that date that I mentioned, the May 30th date. That is our start point. So we can, then we need to figure out how long is it going to take for that to kick in after that. So let's have a look at those regulations here. And so those note, so the governor and council may make regulations, A, regulating the issuance of licenses, registration certificates, and authorizations, including regulations respecting the purposes for which they may be issued. So this is the section that they're using to limit the handgun transfers. So this allows them to make regulations to limit that. The next thing is that there's provisions as to how those go forward. So laying of proposed regulations. They have to lay those regulations before each House of Parliament. And there's no reason to believe that they haven't. I've only got a copy of the one that was laid before the House of Commons, but I suspect that they've sort of gone the full distance there. Now, the next part is report by committee. And it says that it shall, on the day that it's laid, be referred by that House to an appropriate committee of that House, as determined by the rules of that House, and the committee may conduct inquiries or public hearings with respect to the proposed regulations and report its findings to that House. So, making of regulations, and it says this last bit is what tells us when this kicks in. So, a proposed regulation that has been laid pursuant to subsection 1 may be made, A, on the expiration of 30 sitting days after it was laid. So if nothing happens, then after 30 sitting days, not straight days, then it'll come into effect. Now that would put us to October. I think it's October 4th. I didn't exactly check, but it's going to put us into October if that's the way that it comes into effect. But there's a big limitation on that, because with respect to each House of Parliament, 1, the committee reports to the House, or 2, the committee decides not to conduct inquiries or public hearings. So that means that the committee can either say, hey, here's the changes we think should be made, and then they report that back, and then it can be implemented, or they can say, we think it's good. It's fine just as it is, chef's kiss, and off it goes. So from a practical perspective, this could kick in as soon as Tuesday, June 7th, or as long as way into October. And we don't know when that'll be. It might be right on the 7th, or it might be somewhere in the middle. So lots of people have said, I better buy a handgun right now, myself included. But if you're still stalling, you might find that the cupboards are bare, because people have been buying up all the stock. There's still some stuff available online that I've been able to see, but it's typically less popular. It's more unusual. It's more expensive models. And if you've waited a week to watch this video, well, there might not be anything at all. So some people have said, well, why have they given, gun owners this opportunity to buy up stuff? Well, the first is that the legislation kind of requires some delay. It doesn't allow it to really be instant. But the second thing is, of course, that they don't want to pay any compensation. They're already tapped out with, COVID and the long gun, the the Order in Council buybacks and all of this stuff that they've already promised money for, they're just short on cash, and they don't want to have to buy up all of these handguns, including, the stock that gun stores might have left unsold. So rather than doing a buyback confiscation scheme, they're saying, okay, well, we'll let the gun stores blow out all their stock, and then slowly, as gun owners die, and at some point, the last gun owner, somebody who's just got their restricted license at the earliest age that they could, will die, at home in bed after a long life, surrounded by family, and we'll come in and we'll make sure that that family can't inherit those handguns. We'll take them away, and then all handguns will be out of, the hands of ordinary Canadians. Well, except the drug dealers, of course. They're still going to be well armed. And so, yeah, but that is really the idea behind this. That's why they're doing it this way. And, you might be wondering, I've said, hey, this isn't going to be a big thing for public safety. So why would they be doing it? Because they know that this isn't going to be big for public safety. When they say that that's what they're doing it for, it's not true. Well, ultimately, what's happening is that they're looking at the next election, and right now things don't look so great for them. There's a whole lot of issues that are coming up, whether it's, in terms of a buildup of scandals, one after the other, or it's, issues with housing prices, which keep going up, inflation. Lots of Canadians are finding that they just can't, afford the lifestyle that they used to. People are struggling, and people are looking to hold the government responsible for that. So they don't want to run an election on those issues. It's much better if they can run an election on handguns bad. So that's what we're going to see. Is the next election is really going to be one side saying, we will keep these regulations in place, handguns bad. And the other side is going to be saying, well, we think that this should be eased up. Canadian target shooters are not the source of crime. We're not the problem. And yeah, this, I think, my read on this is that this is some pretty cold political calculus. And unfortunately, people like myself who enjoy target shooting and find it to be a meaningful part of their life are maybe not the most sympathetic people. Lots of people out there don't have a whole lot of sympathy for these issues. And, some of the people in my comments will be some of those people. But yeah, this is not, I don't expect that this will save any lives, and the impact it'll have on my quality of life is pretty profound. Yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of, I hope that's answered most of your questions, or all of your questions there. If you have more questions, I'm going to be doing more videos on C21. So if you have more questions, please leave them in the comments below. I can try to throw the answer into another video coming up. So thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge. And I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. At the $50 level, Canada's National Firearms Association, the CCFR, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Marc-Olivier Damour. And at the $20 level, McTain, Mark, Jane Babin Luxor, Haywire, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, Bruno R., and Andrew Elsich. Thank you as well to all of my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching, and as usual, I wish I had better news. I've heard from some people that they don't like me they don't like seeing when I'm dropping a video because it's often bad news. Well, unfortunately, this one's bad news too. Anyway, see you next time.